So, first of all, just to introduce ourselves, Professor Hoque and I are colleagues from La Trobe Business School working in the audit area, and Professor Gow and I have been colleagues in this space. We co-authored the book that you mentioned, and we're pleased to be making that as a submission to the inquiry, and we've made arrangements for that through the Secretariat. That work was done when Professor Gow was at Harvard Business School, and he's now the head of a centre at the University of Melbourne. And while we're listing academic acknowledgements, I'd also like to mention Professor Graham Hodge and Professor Ari Freiberg, who are also involved in some of the work we did at Monash University. Our role today, I think, is to be a bit of an academic panel for you to probe and explore some of the topics that have come up. We've watched the deliberations this morning, and we've seen the ASIC session transcripts. So we're aware of the deliberations of the committee so far. We welcome and congratulate you on the deliberations. We think it's a very timely inquiry. Our expertise, we can talk in detail, and I think it would be helpful for you to hear this from us about the competitive dynamics in the auditing industry, and partly from an historical perspective and partly from how that plays out now. We can talk about innovation in auditing and in related fields, and we have some thoughts we'd like to share with the committee about potential policy changes that are relevant to how the system operates now, but also how the system is evolving and may operate in the future. So if that's useful for the committee, we'd be very happy to talk to those.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your attendance here today and your evidence. I'll kick off and then I'll offer the call to other committee members. You would have heard me ask a question this morning, as I also asked ASIC, which is this dilemma, I think, for the committee, which is how can we assess the quality of audit in Australia, given that it appears the best set of data that we have is ASIC, and ASIC has some cautions about how you can use that data more broadly. Are you aware of other data sets that we could draw on to assess audit quality in Australia? And if not, what other measures can we use?
Well, there's sort of a small question and a big question there.
Yeah.
Audit quality data specifically, and we're aware of the conversations around ASIC sampling and their risk-based approach to looking at particular audits. But there's a wider question as well, which is whether the system we have of corporate accountability and financial auditing is serving wider interests. Is it actually answering the questions that we'd like to have answered? And that brings us to a topic that you've probably already thought about, which is that audit expectation gap. Is there a difference between what the pub test or the man in the street, person in the street would expect from an audit versus what you actually get? And I think our view is that over time, the scope of a financial audit has been narrowed down to such a point that it's almost a not very helpful ritual. And then when you get a signed audit report, it doesn't really tell you too much about things you'd like to know, like integrity and fraud, or like financial sustainability. And if you're looking for evidence, I think the Hain Royal Commission was a good example of that, where the companies that were considered in the Royal Commission had all had their accounts audited, and in a narrow sense there was assurance that their accounts adhered to accounting standards, but a disinterested observer might think, well, it would be reasonable to think that an audit would say a bit more than that, like what does it say around performance and integrity? So what I'm saying is that there's a narrow question of audit data, but then there's other evidence that there is a problem in auditing.